prevail.
This is very true.
And so we are here today on Africa Day.
On Africa Day.
On Africa Day. May 25 is Africa Day.
Yeah.
And so I'm extremely excited to take this off with you. All right, so we'll just get started. Our folks have joined us on Zoom and on Facebook Live and wherever they're watching from. And I'd like us to start with you. So here at Baraza, we believe that there are things in our lives that have shaped us, that gave us a set of options to choose from. We may have had, free will and everything, but different circumstances in our lives kind of coalesce to provide the range of options that we choose from. And eventually that's what creates our lives and our reality. And like you, Arit, I grew up a curious child. But being Africans on Africa Day, child to African parents, you know what that means. Once you display a kind of academic competence, I would say, you are encouraged to go in just 3 or 4 lines, right? And so we are kind of generously pushed into the sciences typically. But like you, I eventually found my way into journalism and storytelling, which of course my mother has never recovered from. I'd like you to map out for us briefly a bit about yourself and what you think in your life led you to make such a shift from, this science-oriented path into this field of work where you are right now. Please let us know. I want to see if what you'll say just lines up exactly, because I just have a strong feeling like it's the same story.
It's possible. Yeah. It's possible because as a child in primary school, I have a memory now of being in. So I don't know if they used to do them here, these exchange news programs. And I have this memory of myself holding a microphone with this very, very long cable trailing off in the distance. And I was 7. I was having the time of my life. I did plays. I was the person who was called when they had to go do a reading, a presentation somewhere.
Right.
I also had a wonderful memory. I say had because I don't know if I still have it, which meant, like you said, that when it was time for the exams that say where you go, I crammed everything crammable. I handed it over to the examiners and they said, this one's science.
Great. Obvious.
Obvious, it's so obvious.
It's so obvious.
I couldn't draw a line to save my life, so technical drawing.
Yeah.
I failed further maths consistently for 3 years.
Yeah.
But if you are brilliant, you do science.
Yes. And it's like it's a formula. Equals science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very sad because I don't know that we explored aptitude. Right. Which would have immediately put me into an art or a social sciences class, now that I think about it. So of course, then I went to university and studied biochemistry. Very happily realized that this was not my path, became a school administrator because my friend's mom was looking for an assistant administrator for somebody who was starting a school. And that was the thing that thankfully stopped me from going for my master's in immunology.
Sounds so much like me. Like, I think at this point we are living the same life.
The same life, And then one day I'm sitting down. So 2010 or 11, I go into a reality show. It's a debate reality show. And one of the critiques that the judges have is that I'm not debating, I'm conversing. They're like, this is a debate show, you're having conversations,
Yeah, why converse when you can debate?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then a couple of years after that, the executive producer of that show calls me because she's starting a channel and she thinks I will be perfect for the news show. And at that point, I was trying to decide, do I want to become an education consultant? There was an NGO that was talking to me about heading their comms team. And then this job option came up. And when you talk about that moment that it almost seems like it redirects your life.
Yeah.
That was it for me.
Right.
I knew that was my direction. And 8 years later, here I am. Yeah.
How would you say that your science background finds its way into your reporting? For me, I've always found myself, even as a writer and a journalist, I'm always very highly analytical. I'm always thinking more about describing or explaining things rather than being a news hound, chasing stories and, like breaking the news and breaking headlines. I don't think I'm a great news hound. I know that many of my colleagues are way better than I am in that. For me, I was always drawn to like the day two story idea. Like, what does this all mean? I'm always like, what does this mean?
Yes.
So for you, how would you say that your science background finds its way into the work that you do today?
I would say that it is probably what that science background didn't give me, which was that I struggled with biochemistry because many of the concepts did not seem real to me. They were very abstract. So I didn't understand the why of them.
Why?
Exactly. And the things that did make sense, philosophy and logic, pharmacology for some reason, because I could tell that these interactions caused, it took a while to realize that biochemistry was difficult because I didn't understand it. I didn't relate to it. So like you, when I'm engaging with people, I want to know why. I want to know what is the thing that is common. What is our common experience, or what is the thing that differentiates your experience from mine?
Right. So you're looking for the story, basically.
I'm looking for the story, but I'm also looking for the nuances of the story. I'm looking for the thing that we didn't assume would be part of the story, but it's decided how this,
Yeah.
There's so many details. And I think that those are the things I explore when I tell stories.
Right.
Yeah.
The details and the nuances.
Yes, the nuances. Yes.
For me, I always felt like my biomedical degree was not asking the right questions of me. It required me to answer a certain set of questions that I could answer. But I was always feeling like, look, there's a whole universe of other things that I know. Why are you not asking me these other
ask me
things?
this one.
Exactly, exactly. And for me, I think that's what kind of, made me make the shift.
Okay.
So I want us now to talk about two very influential pieces for anyone who reports on Africa, about Africa today. First is How to Write About Africa, which was a short story written by the late Binyavanga Wainaina. It's been 2 years since we lost him. I think for me, that was one of the most influential pieces of writing that I have ever interacted with. I believe it came out in 2006, around there, or five. I think 2005 in Granta magazine. And to this day, I can quote whole paragraphs of it.
So cool.
That's how impactful it was. That was the first time I saw in writing so clearly that there's a whole range of questions that are never asked about Africa, right? Bringing back to what we've just come from talking about. For you, what would you say what are some of the works that have influenced your work? Especially the moments in your life when you've had the power to shape how a story is framed, where you're not working within structures that you cannot influence, but now you have the power to shape them in some way. I see some of your work, for example, responding to Chimamanda Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story, which to me is in conversation with Binyavanga's How to Write About Africa, right? They're both talking about, pushing back on this idea that there's only one Africa, the one that is, consistently in kind of the global imaginary of this African place, right? What would you say are some of the works that have influenced how you frame your work?
I would say, and it might not be very popular, that I don't know if specific works have influenced my work as much as my growing realization and frustration.
Yeah.
So these works lived in our everyday realities.
Yes.
And I mean, we see it so clearly with COVID.
Yes.
And how there was such an expectation where COVID was concerned on the continent.
Yes.
And whenever Africa has defied those expectations, it's like, why aren't people dying? What are we missing? Are numbers being underreported? There's rarely a an interest, a curiosity about what is it we're missing from this narrative, going back again to our initial premise. And I think that for me, it's an ongoing awareness as well as a frustration, that there's so many, again, nuances and perspectives and experiences that we should be pulling into. Instead, it seems that we often stand from a basis and then conclude from there.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's not a blank page.
Yes.
And it should be a blank page. We should be approaching African storytelling like, what is it I don't know about this situation? What can this situation teach me?
Yes. Instead of looking for something to confirm what you already know.
Exactly. Yes. And I mean, as storytellers, we do have bias. But it's then important to engage with an awareness of that bias. And so with the work that I do, it is that mingled frustration and realization and curiosity.
Right.
What do our stories look like when we are the ones telling them?
Right.
Yeah.
I love how you framed it, that it's frustration mixed with curiosity.
Yeah.
That is really potent as something that motivates us to do this work.
Yeah.
You're the host of African Voices Changemakers, a show about the trendsetters shaping Africa today. What would you say are the most delightful and surprising stories that you've covered on that show? The ones which, if you had a blank check and unlimited resources, you could turn into a movie or a podcast or a 10,000 word story, or just needed like more time and more space because that's how rich they were.
I think that I'm always fascinated by stories about women who challenge. I think that if I were to do a podcast, it would actually be women who challenge.
Women who challenge.
Because we have so many stories.
Right.
There's a Senegalese surfer, I think her name is Khadija, who grew up in a surfing village in Senegal. And her brothers learned how to surf, but she was a girl, so nobody taught her. And then she left home and traveled, and now she's training for the Olympics.
Wow.
Yes. And it's interesting because even in the Olympics, she is facing now racism as opposed to sexism. Or we have Zosie Tunzi, who we think, oh yeah, Miss World, it's beauty, it's frivolous. But no, it's a woman who, it was considered revolutionary that she won a contest with short hair.
Yes.
There's a part of you that is like, should it be? But also, why is it such a big deal?
Yes.
I interviewed Umra Omar, and she's running for governor of Lamu.
Yes.
And Lamu, we talked about, for her, balancing being conservative with some of the work she wants to do. And she talks, for instance, about going to give a talk at a school, and she asks for questions, and one of the kids says to her that they really liked seeing the way she dressed. Not just because it wasn't just a fashion statement, but the fact that a woman who looked the way she did could be running for governor.
Yes.
And these are the nuances. There's a surfer in South Africa who's a black surfer, a black female surfer, and who wants children from more disadvantaged communities to experience the sea. There's so many people who, in just their daily experiences, are challenging what, again, we are told the narrative is. And as a woman, we're frequently just these day-to-day pushbacks against, success, against thriving. We start our lives with so many barriers. I would love to sit down with some of these women and say, tell me about those.
Yes.
Tell me when you realized that this was your way through.
Yes.
Tell me,
yes.
Those are the kinds of stories. Any stories about women who are both why and why not.
Yes.
Those are the stories I'm always delighted by, always fascinated by.
Yes. Yeah. Why not?
Yes.
Yes. Why not us?
Yes.
Exactly.
Why not me? Why can't I do this?
Yeah. I see a lot of that coming through in the framing and the reporting in your show.
Yeah.
It's always about, it's not just about kind of Africa, just the novelty aspect of like, look at the first time this is happening in Africa, as if we're always like catching up to things that are already a thing elsewhere. But it's more of saying that there is a freshness that is inherent and that exists and that doesn't need to be compared with what's already happening elsewhere.
Exactly.
And that kind of framing is always very refreshing.
It is.
Yes, it's almost life-giving when you're saturated in a world that you described earlier, that is waiting for like, I wonder what's happening in Africa. You know,
Right.
which brings me to what I want us to talk about, the African story, right? Which is such a tired phrase right now.
I know.
Mostly because these days I'm always very aware about how power and power dynamics and the way power flows actually defines what the African story is. Of course, we know in human society, for some reason, those with more power always get the space to frame the African story. And in doing that, framing is a bit like gardening, right?
Yeah.
Gardening is mostly elimination. It's getting rid of what is not convenient, what is not productive. Gardening is about removing what you don't want to exist, right? And a lot of this, like the African story conversations, tend to do that in practice. What they do is that they weed out what is not convenient, what is not, what doesn't fit well in what they think is important or is African. These kind of conversations where people say, that's an African, that is an African, right? I was listening to one of your interviews with African Women in Media with Dr. Yemisi. And you said that we as journalists should always remember that we are telling a narrative and not our narrative, our own narrative. That our story is really just part of a bigger story, right? I'd like to hear you speak to that. How does that land for you? That so much of kind of these power decisions that we make have to do with what we choose not to report about rather than what we choose to highlight.
I think that sometimes we don't recognize how we are perpetuating narratives.
Right.
Because if, for instance, I only ever see you with your scarf, the day I want to talk about, I will talk about you in the context of that scarf, So we many times, even when we are stepping away from a narrative, we are standing in the perspective of that narrative to tell a story. So we never really step away. And what I'm enjoying so much more is how people are challenging the ways that stories are framed.
Right.
I like that when a new story goes up and it's framed in a way that is problematic, there's pushback. There's why are you saying the story this way? Because
active
then,
pushback.
it's active pushback.
Yes.
And you are right. There's many times the fact that the more power people have, the more they decide what that narrative is. So it's also a beautiful thing to see how storytelling is being democratized on the continent, that I don't have to be a journalist, in the textbook sense of the word. If I have a phone with a camera and an internet connection, I can tell a story. Because then what that does is it challenges gatekeepers. It challenges who is in control, who has the power really. Because if I have 100,000 followers and I can do a TikTok and share my perspective, then what does that do for the person who's accustomed to telling this particular story in this particular way?
Right.
And so it then brings you back to humility, to curiosity.
Right.
Because you're aware that if I say this way, there's going to be 2 days later, somebody again saying, but this isn't really accurate.
Yes.
Historically, this is the context.
Yes.
Currently, this is what's happening. So this is how we should reframe the story. It's a beautiful thing that's happening.
Now Africans have the power to do that directly. That was not the case before social media.
No, it wasn't the case.
Yeah.
It wasn't the case. And so, I am also tired of this concept of the African story. What is the African story? each country here has its own unique situations, its unique troubles and triumphs. And even when we have common experiences, our relationships with them are different. So what is the African story? There must be humility in recognizing, like I said in that interview, that you are telling a narrative. Your narrative is not the only narrative. And I think that the more we introspect, the more we recognize that there are many, on the same topic, 10 stories can be told, and each story will be different and unique. That we can acknowledge differences and problems, but frame them in a way where that's not the only, you know, yes, there's poverty, but that's not the only story. And that's why when I said, when we talk about things in counter of, we say, oh yes, Africa is not poor, there are many rich people. But those are two skewed perspectives. There's so much happening in between those perspectives. So again, that blank page, what is your blank page? Do you have a blank page?
You've brought up something interesting, which is like this kind of currently a reactionary counter narrative to Africa. When something is uncomfortable for people to acknowledge or to process, then they say, like what you're saying, equals, look at shopping malls, look at people buying Gucci in Johannesburg as a counter to, and that has a way of invalidating people's experiences. Just because they're rich people, it doesn't mean that now I'm not poor, right?
You know,
Yes.
And I am looking for again more nuance in these stories. That it's not one thing or the other. It's this, that, and everything else.
Yes.
Or sometimes it's neither this nor this. Sometimes the conversation is not poverty, it's gender. You know, there's so many. It's constantly shifting, constantly evolving.
Yes.
And I am looking forward. I am excited about and looking forward to seeing stories refreshed. You know, more context, more nuance, more history. You know, when we talk about poverty, I like that when people, for instance, talk about a certain thing, they talk about the colonial history and how that has influenced the now. Or when you talk about women, you can say traditionally, this was the problem that has led to now. We're learning more. So I think we're getting to tell better stories.
Kenyan director Wanuri Kahiu, who directed the film Rafiki, she has talked about wanting to see more Afro bubblegum stories. What she means by that is just like not heavy thematic African content, but just light, happy stories of people living. And she was saying like most of the rest of the world is not like, you don't have to like respond to problems in order to create, right? You can just do what you're saying. In the middle is that people are living and lives are meaningful, right? So how do you see the work that you do fitting into that? That sometimes the burden on us is like speaking to the moment, which at times is like so heavy. All we want to do is just like tell the story of the acrobats who you know, who do their thing in traffic. That's a thing in some, you know, traffic lights in Nairobi now. They're acrobats. I mean, like,
I mean, just look at that. Look at that. I sometimes see people become othered. Because of the weight of our narratives. So you tell LGBT stories on the continent, and you must speak about human rights abuses, about being outed, about violence. Those are important.
About cyberbullying,
doxing, all of these things. But what you can often find is that people in the mainstream then say, oh, those poor people, you know, those, oh, so sad. I mean, queer people also fall in love. They finish their salary in the second week. Their bosses are frustrating. They go out drinking on Friday and forget their keys. Do you understand? Like, there's so much where we're living. We're human. We are being, and we're watching acrobats and putting that on, you know, writing a story about that.
Or TikTok, maybe.
Or TikTok, you know.
Which is why I love TikTok. The best thing, this is not paid content, folks, but the best thing about TikTok is how random it is. I mean, it's just so strange. It's so strangely and delightfully random. And in some ways, it's a pushback to how highly curated some of these social media platforms have become after you've been on the platform for a certain time. You know, the algorithm has kind of learned, and like you already like being channeled. But TikTok is just so, it's so weird. It's so delightfully weird. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. There is space for bubblegum stories.
Yes.
And when I put it in quotes, it's not because that's not a valid name.
Yeah.
It's because the fact that stories might be considered frivolous doesn't mean that they aren't important.
Yes.
You know, it's important for us to explore all the ways that we are human.
Yes.
And existing and celebrating and,
yes,
you know, everyday things.
Yes.
So I like also when we do stories like that about people who, you know, somebody in fashion or people who, yes, didn't need to walk barefoot, you know, somewhere to achieve success. Some people started out maybe with some privilege, and are doing things that aren't necessarily solving poverty, but maybe are giving people another media experience. Or, you know, I like that.
Yeah.
There should be more of that.
Yeah. And I think we should also, even as audiences, as listeners, as consumers of content, also just be in the space where we can process these things in that way.
Oh, yes.
Because I think media sometimes, news especially, is so heavy. It's so heavy all the time.
Yes.
But the interesting thing is that when you look at the stories that are the most shared, the most commented on, the most engaged with, none of them are, you know, heavy politics stories. And that's not because people are shallow, it's because there's a way that people live their lives in a way that is not, that does not fit neatly with these frames that are constantly being put out all the time, that make people feel like they are spectators in a gladiatorial contest. And that's not meaningful. It's not a way to live a life for you to feel like you're a spectator in life.
I think that COVID did a great deal to challenge a lot of that storytelling. Because when you're in the middle of a global pandemic, you don't want, you need a break. You want something joyful. You want a video of somebody's kitten, you know, playing with a ball, or you want a story about, you know, baking banana bread and how you realize, you know, and I'm really happy to see people saying we also have joy in our lives. We have ordinariness.
Yes, ordinariness. Can we please be ordinary? You know, that's all we're asking for.
You know, let's just wake up one day and have a normal day.
Yes.
You know, and let that be the story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what is the most frivolous thing that you watched or read during COVID, especially last year? We're not saying that COVID is over, but I think last year when the whole like quarantine lockdown thing was very new.
Gosh, I don't know.
I can answer. It was Tiger King on Netflix. that was a trip.
I watched Tiger King like, no, he did not. You know?
Yeah.
You know? I also, there were many times when I didn't have the capacity to watch a long show. And that's when TikTok videos, you know, Instagram videos, all those videos, those 30-second videos of somebody's banana bread fail. I think I just found a lot of delight and escape in randomness. And I'm trying to think of one thing and I can't. But there was a lot of randomness.
There's a lot of randomness. I think it's important for us to always remember, like what you've said, that frivolousness doesn't mean, or kind of light, happy content doesn't mean that it's not important or it's not meaningful. Because joy is a huge part of what makes life worth living. Because honestly, if I had to like write a serious op-ed all day, every day, I mean, like, that's not living.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
So I think for me, I'm always trying to find joy and delight in everything that we do, which makes the work that we do meaningful in its own way.
Yes.
What I mean is that even if no one is fired because of your heavy hitting investigative story, it doesn't mean that the work didn't matter or that it was not meaningful. That there has to be a way for us to always find joy in what we are doing. Because I think that's what makes life meaningful. It's not always about the struggle. Sometimes it's about finding joy in the struggle, you know? I say this a lot, and it always emerges again and again in the work that we do here at Baraza, in the interviews that we do. And we want this space to be a place that kind of speaks to that. That there can be beauty and joy and delight in the work that we're doing, even in its meaning and its impact. Yes. Speaking of impact, you're Nigerian. Last year, I think, was a big year in Nigeria. And not just in Nigeria, really, but around the world. I wouldn't say, I think we were in a kind of a different global moment of consciousness in 2020. And I think today is the day which marks 1 year since George Floyd was murdered. I believe it's today. And in some ways, George Floyd's murder was not just the moment that sparked, this year of consciousness, if I can say, but it was just one of the many unjust, silent, inexcusable, cruel deaths and moments of injustice that especially people of African descent around the world have had to contend with. Not just in 2020, like this is not a thing that makes 2020 a different year because of that, but somehow some coalescing of different forces created this moment for us last year. And Nigeria was a big part of that with End SARS. And that movement, in a significant way, was kind of driven by people you don't normally see at the front of like the revolution, right? Which is something I've really loved about, the movements that have come up in the past, 5 to 7 years. They're not the usual suspects. They're not the usual kind of career NGO type people. It's people who are a lot more grounded in and faithful to life, the joy of living, and are speaking to the obstacles to their joy. Really, that's the reason why they're doing what they're doing. Refusing to accept the way things are, and believing that there could be a different way of existing in the world, not for some big ideological goals most of the time, but it's mostly just to have a life with more dignity, more joy, and more meaning. I'd like to hear from you how that lands with you, what resistance means to you, and also speaking to us, especially for those of us who are watching or listening to this from Kenya, which, as we were saying earlier, as we were preparing for this conversation, Kenya and Nairobi in particular tends to be very parochial. By that, I mean we think that Kenya is Nairobi and Africa is Kenya and Nairobi is the universe. And just thinking about what, the young people in Nigeria were doing last year and are continuing to do, how you would speak to that for us here in Nairobi.
NSARS, I think this is, I don't know that I've spoken about it publicly since that month. I don't recall, I recall one other time in Nigerian history where there was this unified joy.
Unified joy. I love that.
And belief in possibilities that all of a sudden existed. And you're right, it was young people, it wasn't career activists. It was these decentralized but cohesive movements by, like you said, that that coming together.
Yeah.
And it was such a marvel to see, to watch the protests and to see people all clear in their belief that we have what it takes to change the narrative. I don't know that I have recovered from what happened on the 20th of October.
Yeah.
The Tollgate massacre.
Yeah.
And the many other young Nigerians who died.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have finished mourning. And it took thinking about this conversation to actually accept that.
Yeah.
That I am still in mourning.
Yeah.
For the people that died and for the way that promise and possibility were in a sense cut short.
Yes.
I have not recovered, and I am giving myself space to continue to mourn.
Yes.
I'm gonna move away from that because I'm getting emotional. But you are right. It was a global. There was something happening last year with people all of a sudden again asking, why not?
Why not?
You know, pushing back. I think that there are many things that are a common thread, especially on the continent. And one of the things that is very common is that young people are frustrated. The young people want to do more and give more and have space to be more. And I don't know what the future holds.
Yeah.
But I am challenging us, especially since this is Africa Day, to remember that our Nairobi is what you said is so like, yes, because we think like that in Lagos. We think Nigeria is Lagos, and Africa is Nigeria, And if we are all sitting in our independent existences, we might often miss that we are talking about the same problems.
Yes. But sitting in our small corners.
Our small corners.
Right.
So I'm wanting to see more.
Yeah.
I'm wanting more of these conversations. I'm wanting, what do you have to teach me that I can then take back and adapt?
Right.
I still believe that Africa's future is its youth.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward. I believe, I have to believe.
Yes.
That we will continue to challenge these narratives step by step. Continue to challenge them. Yeah.
What do you think you would say is something that was a big surprise to you in terms of how the movement was being organized? Just what I don't want to preempt your answer, but just you talked about this being a decentralized movement.
Yes.
Maybe just like speak to that, because that is something that really, really struck me about NSAS.
I don't know how NSAS struck such a common chord. Because what often happens with political movements is one person is spearheading it, and the force of their personality is what pulls people.
Yes.
But here you have somebody from this community saying, I want to organize a protest. And then somebody's like, I'll cook. And another person is like, I'll organize, medic aid, and I'll do this and I'll do that. It was, I mean, there was this whole laugh about how there were food trucks at some of the places.
Yes.
And they're like, what do you want to eat? Would you like a waffle or a croissant as you are chanting for your freedom?
I mean, have the croissant as
hold the croissant, drink some coffee, and then, and there was so much joy.
Yeah.
There was a marvel at what could happen, that somebody would tweet, we need a medic, and there would be a reply on it.
Yes.
And 25 minutes later, there would be a medic.
Yeah.
It was a joy. And I must speak also here to the many, I think another thing that was significant for me was that it was such a women-led movement.
Yes.
Women stood up, because traditionally African women have been warriors and leaders and so on. To see these women, like you say, not activists, not everyday people, pulling together at much, much risk to their lives.
Yes.
To the queer people who Because of course, hierarchies of oppression, it is not yet time to talk about queer rights.
Yes.
But standing with their banners and saying, no, queer Nigerian lives matter too.
Yes.
Because even if you don't get harassed by the police, we are constantly harassed.
Yes.
And having those people say, no, this is our moment and I will not allow you exclude me from this moment.
Yes.
It was everybody's moment.
Yes.
Everybody had something that they could do. And the power of that is something that I hope I never forget.
And just going back to what you were talking about before, about defining what the African story is, a lot of times these movements fall victim to that.
Yes.
That idea that this is the problem.
Yes.
And all you people, it's not yet your time for your issues to be addressed. And yet they're living their lives that are not just represented. I think represented is a weak word to describe it. That in order for us to have a family or a society or a nation, it's not just one type of person that is the archetype of this society. And once you attend to them and their problems and their anxieties, that there'll be like trickle down justice, right? That this person is esteemed, therefore. I think a lot of movements kind of fall victim to that kind of thinking. For example, if we or elevate the Black man, you know, or this idea of like family values, you know, which is only like part of the story, right? When we do that, we end up gardening, basically. We eliminate what is not convenient for the sake of this thing that we think is beautiful to flourish. And yet they're all part of nature, right?
All part of nature.
Exactly. There are no gardens in nature. They're just forests and fields and and things are not disciplined the way a garden is disciplined, right?
We talk a lot about intersectionality and it can be overused as a word. But oppression is intersectional. And by that very definition, liberation must be intersectional.
Yes.
You cannot say, I will, once I, like, there's no trickle down.
There's no trickle down
there
justice.
Is this again, with this in connection with that, we have to think about it that way. We have to. It's a coming together. It's the synergy. That's how you change things.
Right. And again, there are no trickle down stories. They're not, the story just because the high-flying startup incubator type African, urban, Afropolitan person is kind of getting more visibility, then that means that Africa is rising.
It doesn't work
like that person is not all that there is. That person does not like capture our story, right?
They don't.
I recently came across a quote which I shared with you by Rosa Luxemburg. She was a Polish revolutionary, if I can call her that, early 20th century. She said the most revolutionary thing one can do is always proclaim loudly what is happening. That speaking the truth is that powerful. It's not so much about taking up arms or whatever, because all these things can be done in the name of something that is actually not truth.
This is so true. This is so true. Very true.
Very,
very true. I think I see more and more of that happening. I think I see more people speaking. I think that for the longest time, we thought that I must be able to speak for all of us. But perhaps I can speak for myself. Perhaps I can speak about you. Perhaps I can give you a mic. So
Pass the mic.
You can speak. And I'm so inspired by the many people who are challenging, again, who gets to tell the stories and what a story looks like. Because if we are all speaking, then there are perspectives to be heard. So yes, I like that. I like that quote.
Good. I think we're going to just shift gears here as we're coming to the end of our discussion, which has been really, really rich.
This has been so good.
So rich.
So good. This has been very good.
And some of the things that you've said, I'm really going to ponder about, and I will probably invite you here again for us to do part 2 of this conversation, which I believe is just so timely and so important, especially if we are to hold on to the moment of possibility that
Yes.
we just had a very small taste of.
Yes.
It was just a taste,
Oh
you
my
know?
goodness. Yes. Yes. And
It
I
was,
am
yeah,
glad that to be able to relive
yeah,
that,
yeah,
to be able to honor that,
yeah.
and to honor the many people who at great risk and who
Yes.
are continuing to live with the consequences, even
Yeah.
when the rest of the world seems to have moved on. I'm glad that it happened in this moment when we could all see it.
When we could all see it. Yeah. And not just in a moment where it could be reported on.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Exactly.
But where people had the power to speak.
Exactly, to speak.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't know if there are any questions coming in right now. No questions for now, but if there are, our audience will post them there.
Yes.
I just want us to talk about cultivating hope. I'm using the word cultivating. I know I have kind of derided the garden. I have maligned gardeners. I'm so sorry, guys. I know that there are many people who watch us and love us who are gardeners. But I was using Jamaica Kincaid's framing of the garden, that the garden is many times a work of elimination, that cultivating is about eliminating, right? But I want us to think of cultivation in a different sense, of cultivating hope, of providing an opportunity for hope to thrive. And the work that we do, even more than what we encounter in movements and in that kind of work, even the ordinary reporting, journalism work that we do every day, is often very heavy emotionally. You're carrying on people's stories, and in some way you're carrying a piece of their lives with you, which makes it quite taxing on the emotions and on the spirit, right? Mariam Kaba says that hope is a discipline. And what she means by this is that it's something that you practice every day. You're not waiting for things to be better. That hope does not just emerge when things have a good chance of working out. I think that's optimism. Dr. Cornel West makes a very clear distinction between hope and optimism. Optimism is like when the odds are in your favor, you're reading the weather and you're like, yeah, we are likely to succeed. But hope is like, even in the face of the most bleak circumstances, that this is something that you can practice and discipline yourself into as a form of daily work, daily resistance. What are your practices for cultivating joy, for keeping yourself watered and fed and nourished? I mean that deeply, in a deep kind of spiritual and emotional way.
I think that the first thing for me was challenging myself to identify. I think that you must know what joy is, what ease is, what gratitude is. I think that many times the reason why we struggle is because we don't have a picture of the thing that we're trying to cultivate, so I have learned to challenge myself. One of my realizations, for instance, was that, you know what, oh goodness, my friend said yesterday, you're so happy clappy. Yes, I am. This is me. Why can't we all just love each other and get along? And I've stopped fighting that. This is who I am. I am here in this world. I say that it is my mission and my practice to be a soft place for myself first, and then for those around me. This is me. I have, and in owning that, I would say, what does softness look like?
What does softness look like?
Some days it's making a meal. And making a meal is very mindful for me. The chopping and the mixing and the awareness that I am feeding myself. There's something very sacred about it for me. I have learned to pick up the phone and send voice notes to the people I love. And it doesn't have to be like a big conversation. I was thinking about you. I want you to remember that I love you. I send birthday messages on Twitter because it makes people happy, and I'm like, I can do this. Okay, you've got this. You know, it is being intentional and saying sometimes being able to say, I don't have capacity for this.
Yeah.
I cannot carry this right now.
Yeah.
And it is not because it does not deserve carrying. It is because if I pretend that I can carry it, I do it no justice, and I do myself no justice. So recognizing that there are some times when I can't, but also telling myself that when I can, I will come back. It is being honest with myself in, again, the softest, kindest way. It is committing to growth in challenging the patterns of my existence and saying, how can I do one better today than yesterday, but still allowing it to be a process. Let the journey be as big a deal as the destination, and let who you are on that journey also be a priority. So it is in identifying intentionally, and I like where you say it's a discipline, because now I'm getting better at saying, oh no, oh wow, I can't do this today. Okay, let's put it away. What can we do?
Yes.
And I'm getting better at it, at just finding joy in a sunset.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time sitting and being okay with that. And
Yeah.
I will sit down, some birds in a tree outside my house, and I watch them just for minutes at a time, just watching them.
Yeah.
It's becoming aware of the details,
Yeah.
that look at us. Random meeting last year.
Yeah.
You remember, we were standing at the same snack table.
Yes.
And a year and some later, here we are sitting down having this conversation. Joyful is that?
Yeah.
And these pockets of joy exist in everyday life. My commitment is to finding them.
Yes.
And saying this is what joy looks like.
Yes. So we are almost out of time.
Okay.
That was my last question, and I want you to close for us. I don't want us to start a Twitter war. Hashtag someone tell. Please don't tweet us with someone tell.
Oh, goodness.
But I just wanted to give you like a soapbox moment for like a minute or two.
Okay.
And tell me, what is the biggest misconception about Nigeria that you would want people to just abandon? Like, just quit thinking this about Nigeria.
Hey, where do we start?
Do we need another hour?
I don't know if an hour will do it.
I think it's important because we want to kind of ground this in reality, right?
Yeah.
You're not just kind of like a high level abstraction person. You're a Nigerian.
I'm a Nigerian. I am.
Yeah.
I am.
And that's a kind of a big, you're already a big personality in the global consciousness, in the global mind. Yeah.
I want to start this by saying that one of the most disconcerting things that happened when I started to come to Nairobi is somebody randomly saying, where are you from? And I'm like, Nigeria. And they're like, madam, I'm like, wow.
You're just like, stop that.
Like, let's not. But there is this conception of this bigger than life, brash Nigerian who's not afraid to cut corners and exist in the gray areas.
Yes.
And while those people exist, there are many people who are not loud.
Yes.
Who just want to wake up quietly, eat their food, do their work, and go to sleep. Who don't spend Fridays popping bottles in the club.
Yes.
Who are really just regular folk.
Yes.
This Nigerian identity is not always brash.
Yes.
It's not always loud. There are as many ways to be Nigerian as there are to be African.
Yeah.
And, it's not, Nollywood is we're not all ritualists. There's no money tree in the backyard. It's interesting how that storytelling, again, has really, we aren't all millionaires, just big spenders.
Yeah.
And there's very often a cultural context in the things that define a Nigerian that I think we often miss. So that hospitality for us means that if I'm going out with you, then of course you are my guest. you know,
It's on you.
it's on me.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend, after I'd been here for a while and I went back, we finished, she invited me for drinks. And at the end of it, I was like, oh, how much is our bill? And she's like, Arits, am I poor? You know?
Yeah.
But that comes not from showiness, but from hospitality.
Yes.
I will take care of you.
Yes. So, the concept of inviting someone to have lunch with you,
yes,
and then expecting each of us to pay our own, like,
I see so many people saying, wait, so you invite me for your birthday party, then I should pay for my food. Why?
Why did you invite
Why
me?
did you invite me? I've stayed in my house. You know?
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah.
so I think there are just so many ways to be Nigerian.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's how it is.
I'm so glad that was that's where we end this conversation. That's a good note to end it on.
Yes.
That there's so many ways for us to be, the various identities that are inscribed upon us.
That's such a good way to say it.
Inscribed upon us. So we are at the top of the hour, so we are right on time.
Fantastic.
This has been a wonderful conversation, Arit. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's been
Thank you for being here. Thank you to the ancestors and the universe for making it possible for us to speak to each other today. And remember that this is just one of a series of the kind of conversations we have here at Baraza. We have many, many more that we have planned and that we are curating. So please keep in touch with us, keep following our social media handles to keep informed of what we have prepared and in store. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We're on all those channels. And if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, which is a powerful newsletter, please go to our website, barazalab.com, and you'll see a pop-up which will ask you to put in your email. The purpose of that email is to send you the newsletter. There is no other purpose for that email address. And I think that is the easiest way for us to share all that we have and all that we're doing here at Baraza Lab. So thank you so much. Please share, like, comment on this video when it's up.
I'm looking forward to it.
And our next session is next month, and we will announce who will be our esteemed guest for next month in due time. My name is Christine Mungai again. I'm a writer and journalist and the curator of Baraza Sessions. So thank you for being here.